Hello viewers, in this video we will learn how to transform simple sentences into complex sentences. And for those who haven't watched the previous videos yet, which are relevant to this topic, I made those video links in the description box below, and I hope you will click on them and watch them in case you need further information. If you do like my channel, please subscribe to my channel. Let's start. If you have present participle phrase in a simple sentence, you need to change the present participle phrase into a subordinate clause of the complex sentence. So here we have cooking the food is the present participle phrase. So this phrase needs to be converted into a dependent clause of the complex sentence. And Mina went to the office. This part of the simple sentence contains the finite verb. So it will be remain as it is, and it will be the independent clause of the complex sentence. And the dependent clause and independent clause of the complex sentence should follow the tense of the simple sentence, which is in the past tense. So another thing we have to notice here is that here we have two actions. One is cooking the food and going to the office. So when you have two actions in a sentence, it indicates a time wrap. So when you have time wrap, you need to use relative adverb when as a subordinating conjunction to construct the dependent clause. So we will write down when here, and the subject of this dependent clause should follow the subject of the main sentence. Here in the main sentence we have a proper noun Mina. If you have proper noun in the simple sentence, the first clause of your complex sentence should contain that proper noun too. And if we write the subordinate clause first, we need to use that subject here. So we write down Mina here, Mina. And cooking the food, this cooking participle will take the form of its verb tense, which is in the past tense, so it's going to be cooked. And we will write down the object as it is, the food. So we have found our dependent clause, which is when Mina cooked the food. We put a comma. Then since we have written down the subject Mina first, we need to use its pronoun she to start the independent clause. So we write she, and we write down the rest as it is. She went to her office. That's how we can change this type of simple sentence into complex sentence. Here in the simple sentence, we have a present participle phrase, cooking in the kitchen, which modifies the noun phrase, the girl, after it. So when a present participle phrase modifies a noun phrase after it, it's called predicative adjective phrase. So we have to change this predicative adjective phrase into a dependent clause of the complex sentence. And this predicative adjective phrase is within the simple sentence. So when we convert the predicative adjective phrase into a dependent clause, we have to keep the clause within the complex sentence. So we have to keep this dependent clause within the independent clause of the complex sentence. So to do that, we need to write down the first subject, which is the girl. So we write down the girl. Because the girl is a human being, we need the relative pronoun who as a subordinating conjunctions to construct the dependent clause. So we write down who here. Our subordinate clause should follow the tense of the simple sentence, which is in the present tense. So when we refer to this, we have to write the dependent clause in the present tense too. But cooking refers to the ongoing activity. So when it refers to the ongoing activity, we have to write down our dependent clause into present continuous tense. So we will write down is cooking. After that, we have to write down the adverbial phrase which is in the kitchen. So we write down in the kitchen. So we have found our dependent clause of the complex sentence, which is who is cooking in the kitchen. Now, one thing we have to notice here is that who is cooking in the kitchen is a essential relative clause, or it's called restrictive relative clause. So when we have restrictive relative clause in a complex sentence, we don't need to use comma. So we will keep it as it is. So next thing we have to do is to write down the remainder part of the simple sentence, which is my wife. So this is how we transform this sort of simple sentence into complex sentence. In this simple sentence, we have a single past participle which is purchased, which is modifying a noun machine. So when we have a single past participle in a simple sentence, we have to convert this single past participle into a subordinate clause of the complex sentence. So before we do that, we need to understand that the simple sentence has a noun phrase which is the new purchased machine. So we need to remove the purchased from this phrase, and we need to write down the new subject of the complex sentence, which is the new subject of the independent clause of the complex sentence, that is the new machine. And the new machine, this noun phrase is impersonal noun phrase. So we can use relative pronoun which or that as a subordinating conjunctions to construct the dependent clause of the complex sentence. So we will write down which here, which. Now the tense of the subordinate clause should follow the tense of the simple sentence, which is in the past tense. But the new machine is a thing which has been purchased by someone else. So we have to use passive form of the past indefinite tense here. So if we want to do that, we can write down was purchased. So it's qualifying the new machine which was purchased. So which was purchased is the dependent clause of the complex sentence, and we can treat this dependent clause as a non-essential relative clause. So we can put one comma here and another comma after the clause. Now we need to write down the remainder part of the simple sentence, which will be the finite verb of the independent clause of the complex sentence, which is was not working. We can make it complex in another way. To do that, we need to keep the purchased in this noun phrase, and we need to remove new from here. So we will write down the new phrase, which is the purchased machine. So the word new should be converted into a dependent clause of the complex sentence. So to use the adjective to be a dependent clause, we can use the relative pronoun which similarly. So we can say which was new in the past tense, and we can treat this dependent clause as a non-restrictive relative clause. So we can put comma, then write down the remainder part of the simple sentence, which is was not working. So you can do it either way. Here we have a simple sentence containing a perfect participle phrase. So this perfect participle phrase, having eaten food, needs to be converted into a dependent clause of the complex sentence, and to do that we need a relative adverb when, because there is a time wrap here, because two actions happened. One is eating food, another one going to the office. So when we have time wrap, we need to use relative adverb when to start the uh, dependent clause. So we write down when. Now one thing is that we need a subject of this subordinate clause. So the subject of the subordinate clause should be the same subject which belongs to the finite verb of the simple sentence. So which is he, we write down he. Now having eaten food should be converted into past perfect tense, because having will take its past form, which is had. So eaten will remain as it is and food is the object. So if we write down had eaten food, so when we had eaten food, we found our subordinate clause of the complex sentence. Another way we can explain it is that if you have two actions happened in the past, the action happened earlier, you can convert it in past perfect tense, and the later action will be in past simple tense. So we will keep the independent clause as it is. He went to the office. In this sentence, present participle being is used as an absolute because the weather and I are not the same subject. When a participle has no direct relation to the subject and finite verb of the main sentence, it is treated as an absolute. So the whole absolute phrase, which is the weather being inclement, that this phrase modifying the action of the main sentence. So what we need to do, we need to convert this absolute phrase into a subordinate clause, and to do that we need to write down since, because this absolute phrase is the reason for not going out, is the reason or is the cause of the action in the main sentence. So we write down since. Besides since, you can write down as or because as a subordinating conjunction to construct the subordinate clause. So after that we need to write down the weather. So we write down the weather as a subject of this subordinate clause. And being, this is the ing form of the V verb, and the past form of this verb is was, because the finite verb of the main sentence is in the past tense, so we have to write down was here. And we write down the adjective word inclement. Then put a comma. So we have constructed our subordinate clause, that is, since the weather was inclement. Then we can write down the remainder part of the simple sentence as it is, which will be the independent clause of the complex sentence, which is I did not go out. I hope over the time you will get used to this sort of transformation of sentence. It will take some sort of exercise, and gradually you will be very efficient on that.